What happens when decades of trust crumble in a single moment? When the person you've loved for 40 years reveals a secret so devastating that forgiveness becomes impossible. This is the story of William and Catherine, a couple who thought they knew everything about each other, until one forbidden door changed their lives forever. Behind that locked door lay not just Catherine's deepest secret, but the end of everything William believed about love, loyalty, and the woman he married. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Rosewood Manor, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs that had graced the hallways for generations. William Harrington adjusted his reading glasses and set down the morning newspaper, his weathered hands trembling slightly, as they always did these days. At 73, he had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythms of retirement, the peaceful predictability of life with Catherine after 4 decades of marriage. Catherine moved through their home with the same grace she had possessed as a young woman, her silver hair still catching the light beautifully as she tended to her beloved orchids in the conservatory. They had built a life together that others envied, successful careers, beautiful homes, respect in their community, and a love that had weathered countless storms. Yet lately, William had noticed something different in his wife's behavior, subtle changes that nagged at the corners of his consciousness. It had started 3 months ago when Catherine began taking longer walks alone, claiming she needed time to think. She would disappear for hours, returning with a distant look in her eyes that she would quickly mask with a warm smile when she noticed him watching. There were phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room, and conversations with their housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, that seemed to stop mid-sentence whenever he appeared. Most puzzling of all was the east wing of their manor house, particularly the room at the end of the corridor that Catherine had always kept locked. When they first moved to Rosewood 20 years ago, she had explained that it was merely storage space, filled with old furniture and family heirlooms that held painful memories. William had respected her need for privacy, never questioning why she alone held the key or why she sometimes spent hours in there when she thought he was asleep. But today felt different. Today, as William watched Catherine hurry toward the east wing with a small wrapped package clutched in her hands, something inside him snapped. The accumulation of months of wondering, of polite distance, of feeling like a stranger in his own home finally reached a breaking point. He had built his entire life on trust and openness, and the growing wall of secrets between them was becoming unbearable. William waited until he heard the soft click of the lock, followed by Catherine's footsteps moving deeper into the forbidden room. Then, with a determination that surprised him, he rose from his chair and walked purposefully toward the kitchen where Mrs. Davies was preparing their evening meal. "Mrs. Davies," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority he hadn't used in years. "I need the spare key to the east room." The elderly housekeeper froze, her wooden spoon suspended over the simmering pot. Her face paled as she turned to face him, and William saw something in her eyes that confirmed his worst fears. She knew whatever secret Catherine was hiding. "Sir, I don't think," she began. But William raised his hand to stop her. 40 years, Mrs. Davies. 40 years I've respected that boundary. But I can't live with walls between us anymore. I need to know what she's hiding from me." His voice broke slightly on the last words, revealing the depth of his pain. Mrs. Davies studied his face for a long moment, seeing the anguish of a man who felt his world slipping away. Slowly, reluctantly, she reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out a small brass key, worn smooth from years of use. "Sir," she whispered, pressing it into his palm, "some secrets are meant to protect the people we love." William closed his fingers around the cold metal, feeling its weight like a stone in his chest. "Then, perhaps it's time I decided for myself what I need protecting from." He walked back through the house with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the quiet corridors. The key felt heavier with each step, and by the time he reached the east wing, his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He paused outside the locked door, listening to the soft sounds of movement within. Catherine was humming, a melody he didn't recognize, and there was something in her voice, a tenderness, an intimacy, that made his stomach tighten with dread. William raised his hand to knock, then stopped. For 40 years, he had announced himself before entering any room in their home. It was a small courtesy, a sign of respect between partners who had chosen to share their lives. But today, something told him that courtesy might be the very thing that allowed the truth to slip away once again. Instead, he slipped the keys silently into the lock and turned it with practiced care. The door opened without a sound, and William stepped across the threshold into his wife's secret world. The room was nothing like the storage space Catherine had described. Instead, it was a carefully curated sanctuary, filled with soft lamplight and the scent of jasmine candles. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, and as William's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he began to make out the faces staring back at him. There was Catherine as a young woman, laughing with a man William didn't recognize. Catherine in a white dress that wasn't the one she had worn when they married. Catherine holding a baby that looked nothing like their daughter Emma had as an infant. And everywhere, in nearly every photograph, was the same man, tall, dark-haired, with kind eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up Catherine's face in a way that made William's chest ache. Catherine stood with her back to him, carefully placing the wrapped package he had seen her carry into a glass display case that held what appeared to be letters tied with ribbon and small mementos. She was still humming, lost in her private ritual, unaware that her carefully guarded world was about to collide with the reality she had hidden from for decades. William's legs felt weak as the implications began to sink in. This wasn't just a room full of old memories. This was a shrine to another life, another love, another version of Catherine that had existed parallel to their marriage. The photographs told a story of deep intimacy, of shared moments, and profound connection, of a relationship that had clearly meant everything to the woman he thought he knew completely. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She spun around, the blood draining from her face as she saw him standing in the doorway. The wrapped package slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. For a moment, neither of them moved, both frozen in the terrible space between discovery and explanation. "William," she breathed, and in that single word, he heard everything he needed to know. This wasn't surprise at an unexpected interruption. This was the sound of someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. He stepped further into the room, his eyes moving slowly from photograph to photograph, each image adding another crack to his understanding of their life together. "Who is he?" William asked, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. Catherine's hands fluttered to her throat, a gesture he had seen her make countless times when she was nervous, but now it seemed like the movement of a stranger. "William, please let me explain. 40 years, he said, cutting her off. His voice was quiet, controlled, but Catherine could hear the pain beneath the surface. 40 years I've loved you, trusted you, built my entire life around you. And all this time, you've been living another life in this room." She took a step toward him, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not what you think, isn't it?" William moved to the display case, looking down at the letters tied with ribbon. Even from this distance, he could see the passionate handwriting, the endearments written in another man's hand. "These are love letters, Catherine. Recent ones, judging by the paper." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of decades of deception. Catherine's carefully maintained composure began to crumble as she watched her husband's face change, watched 40 years of love and trust die in his eyes. "I never meant for you to find out this way," she whispered. William turned to face her fully, and Catherine saw something in his expression that terrified her more than anger would have. It was the look of a man who was seeing her clearly for the first time, and finding a stranger. "The question isn't how I found out," he said softly. "The question is why, in 40 years of marriage, you never trusted me enough to tell me the truth about who you really are." The weight of William's words hung in the air like smoke, filling every corner of the secret room with their accusation. Catherine stood frozen beside the display case, her hand still trembling from the shock of discovery. The golden light from the table lamps that had always made this room feel like a sanctuary now seemed harsh and unforgiving, illuminating every detail of the life she had kept hidden. "Please," Catherine whispered, her voice breaking. "Please sit down, and let me explain everything." William remained standing, his tall frame rigid with the effort of controlling emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "Explain what, Catherine? Explain how you've been living a double life for our entire marriage? Explain how every day for 40 years you've looked me in the eye and lied." "I never lied to you," she said quickly, then immediately recognized the weakness of the argument. "I mean, I never said anything untrue about my feelings for you, about our life together. Lies of omission are still lies." William's voice was deadly quiet. He moved closer to the wall of photographs, studying them with the methodical attention he had once brought to his work as a historian. "This man, what's his name?" Catherine's throat worked as she tried to form the words. "His name was David. David Morrison." Was... William turned sharply. He's dead. No. Catherine's voice was barely audible. No, he's not dead. The silence that followed was deafening. William stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time, and, in many ways, he was. The elegant, composed woman he had married was gone, replaced by this trembling stranger who had been carrying on a relationship with another man throughout their entire marriage. He's alive, William repeated slowly, as if testing the words to see how much they could hurt. You've been in contact with him all these years. Catherine nodded, tears beginning to flow freely down her cheeks. William, you have to understand. No, he said firmly. I don't have to understand anything. What I have to do is figure out how to live with the fact that my wife of 40 years has been in love with another man this entire time. It's not that simple, isn't it? William gestured toward the photographs. Look at your face in these pictures, Catherine. Look at how you smile at him. In 40 years of marriage, I've never seen you look at me the way you look at him in these photographs. The truth of his words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She sank into the antique chair beside the display case, her legs no longer able to support her. I do love you, William. I have always loved you. But you loved him first. It wasn't a question. Catherine closed her eyes, and William saw her shoulders sag as the last of her defenses crumbled. Yes, she whispered. I loved him first. William felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, as if the very architecture of his heart was rearranging itself around this new reality. He had always known that Catherine had had relationships before they met. They had both been in their early 30s when they married, hardly children. But this was different. This was a love that had never ended, never been properly buried, never been replaced by what they had built together. Tell me, he said, settling into the chair across from her with the careful movements of a much older man. Tell me everything. Catherine looked up at him, surprised by the request. She had expected anger, accusations, demands for her to leave. She had not expected this quiet request for the truth. I met David when I was 22, she began, her voice steadier now that she had a task to focus on. I was working at the museum in London, and he was a journalist covering the arts. He was brilliant, funny, passionate about everything he cared about. We fell in love almost immediately. William watched his wife's face as she spoke, seeing the way her expression softened at the memory. It was the same expression he had seen her wear when looking at their grandchildren, or when talking about her happiest moments. It was the expression of someone remembering pure joy. We were together for 5 years, Catherine continued. We talked about marriage, about children, about growing old together. But David was always traveling for his work, covering stories all over the world. He was gone more than he was home, and I needed stability. I needed someone who would be there. So you chose me, William said, and there was no bitterness in his voice, only a terrible sadness. I chose you because I loved you, Catherine said urgently. William, I need you to believe that. What David and I had was passionate, but chaotic. What you and I built together was real and lasting and beautiful. But you never stopped loving him. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. No, she finally admitted. I never stopped loving him. William felt the words like a knife to his chest, but, strangely, there was also relief in finally hearing the truth spoken aloud. And he never stopped loving you. We tried to stay apart, Catherine said, her voice gaining strength as she finally shared the burden she had carried alone for so long. After you and I married, David and I didn't speak for nearly 10 years. But then he came back to London for his mother's funeral, and we met for coffee. Just to talk, to say goodbye properly. William could see where this was leading, but he found he needed to hear every detail to understand exactly how his life had been built on a foundation of divided loyalty. One coffee became dinner. Dinner became letters. Letters became... Catherine gestured helplessly toward the display case. Became this, William finished. Became a parallel life that you've been living right under my roof. We never had an affair, Catherine said quickly. Not in the way you're thinking. We were never physically together after I married you. But emotionally, you've been married to both of us. William's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Catherine flinched at the stark truth of it. I suppose I have been. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 40 years of deception settling between them like a physical presence. William looked around the room again, taking in details he had missed in his initial shock. The fresh flowers, white orchids, Catherine's favorites. The stack of unopened letters on the small writing desk. The half-finished watercolor painting propped on an easel in the corner, depicting a cottage by the sea that William had never seen before. "The package you brought in today," he said suddenly. "What was it?" Catherine's face crumpled. "It's his birthday," she whispered. "I always send him something for his birthday." "What did you send him this year?" "A first edition of his favorite poetry book. The same one he used to read to me when we were young." William nodded as if this made perfect sense, though inside he felt like he was drowning. "And what does he send you?" "Letters, mostly. Sometimes photographs of places he's been, thinking I would enjoy seeing them. Last month, he sent me a pressed flower from a garden in Tuscany that reminded him of my conservatory. The casual intimacy of it, the way they had maintained this connection across decades, sharing small moments and daily thoughts, hurt worse than if Catherine had confessed to a passionate affair. This wasn't just about physical betrayal. This was about emotional fidelity, about the sharing of souls that William had believed was exclusively theirs. "Where does he live?" William asked. "Scotland now. He retired from journalism 5 years ago and bought a small cottage in the Highlands. He writes books about history, like you used to do." "Like me." William smiled bitterly. "I suppose you've told him all about my work over the years." Catherine's silence was answer enough. "Does he know about me?" William continued. "I mean, really know about me? Does he know that I take my tea with exactly 2 sugars and no milk? Does he know that I still read you poetry on Sunday mornings? Does he know that I've spent 40 years trying to make you as happy as you look in these photographs? William, please. Does he know that our daughter Emma has your laugh, but my stubborn streak? Does he know that you cry every year on the anniversary of your mother's death, and that I've held you through every one of those nights? Does he know that you talk in your sleep when you're worried, and that I've spent countless nights listening to you work through problems you never shared with me when you were awake?" Catherine was sobbing now, great shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her chest. "He knows that I love you," she managed. "He knows that you're a good man, that you've made me happy, that you didn't deserve to be hurt by our connection. But that didn't stop you from hurting me anyway. I never wanted to hurt you. I tried so many times to end it with David, to choose just one life, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear to lose either of you." William stood up slowly, his knees protesting the movement. He walked to the window and looked out at the garden they had planted together, the paths they had walked hand in hand for 20 years. Everything looked the same, but he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. "The worst part," he said without turning around, "isn't that you loved him. The worst part is that you loved us both and chose to lie about it rather than trust me with the truth. You robbed me of the chance to decide for myself what kind of marriage I wanted to be in." "What would you have done?" Catherine asked. "If I had told you about David before we married, what would you have done?" William was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "I might have walked away. Or I might have loved you enough to accept that part of your heart would always belong to someone else. But at least it would have been my choice to make." He turned back to face her, and Catherine saw that something fundamental had changed in his expression. The man who had walked into this room an hour ago, the man who had loved her unconditionally for 40 years, was gone. In his place was someone harder, more guarded, someone who was looking at her with the wariness of a person who had learned not to trust. "I need to ask you something," William said, his voice carefully controlled. "And I need you to tell me the truth, probably for the first time in our entire marriage." Catherine nodded, wiping her face with a tissue from the box on the side table. "If David asked you to leave me tomorrow, to come to Scotland and spend whatever years you have left with him, would you go?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Catherine opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. William watched her face, seeing her wrestle with a truth that would determine the rest of their lives. She began, then stopped. "I don't know," she finally whispered. "God help me, William, I don't know." And in that moment of brutal honesty, William felt the last of his forgiveness die. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, its deep resonance echoing through Rosewood Manor like a funeral bell. William had been sitting in his study for 3 hours since leaving Catherine in her secret room, staring at the same page of his book without reading a single word. The leather-bound volume of medieval history that had once been his passion now felt meaningless in his hands, just marks on paper that had nothing to do with the devastating reality of his own life. He had always prided himself on being a rational man, someone who approached problems with logic and careful consideration. But tonight, logic felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. The foundation of everything he had believed about his marriage, his wife, and himself had been systematically destroyed in the space of 2 hours, and he found himself in completely uncharted territory. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made him look up. Mrs. Davies appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern and something that looked like guilt. "Sir," she said softly, "I've prepared your dinner. But, Mrs. Harrington—" She paused, struggling for words. "She's not coming down," William finished. "I didn't expect her to." Mrs. Davies stepped into the room, wringing her hands nervously. "Sir, if I may say something." William gestured for her to continue, though he wasn't sure he could handle any more revelations tonight. "I've known about the room for 15 years, she said quietly. "Mrs. Harrington swore me to secrecy when I started working here, but I've watched her struggle with this burden every day since. She never wanted to hurt you, Mr. Harrington. She's tormented herself over it. And yet she never stopped." William's voice was flat, emotionless. 15 years you've known, and she's continued her correspondence with this man the entire time." "Yes, sir." Mrs. Davies looked down at her hands. "But if I may, I've also watched her love you. I've seen how she lights up when you come home, how she worries when you're late, how she still reaches for your hand when you're walking together. Whatever she feels for this other man, her love for you is real." William was quiet for a long moment, processing this perspective from someone who had observed his marriage from the outside. "Tell me," he said finally, "in your opinion, if David Morrison showed up at our door tomorrow and asked her to leave with him, what would she do?" Mrs. Davies' silence was more telling than any words could have been. "I see," William said. "Thank you for your honesty." After Mrs. Davies left, William found himself walking through the house, seeing their shared life with new eyes. Every room held memories that now felt tainted by the knowledge that Catherine's heart had been divided throughout their creation. The kitchen where she had cooked his favorite meals while thinking of another man. The living room where they had hosted dinner parties, where Catherine had laughed and sparkled while carrying the secret of her other life. The bedroom where they had shared 40 years of intimacy, where she had lain beside him night after night while her thoughts traveled to Scotland. He paused in the conservatory, looking at Catherine's beloved orchids. She had always said they were her greatest joy aside from their family, that caring for them gave her peace. Now he wondered if they reminded her of the pressed flowers David sent from his travels, if every bloom was somehow connected to her secret correspondence. The sound of the front door opening interrupted his dark thoughts. Emma's voice carried through the hallway, bright and cheerful as she called out her usual greeting. "Mom, Dad, I'm here for dinner. I brought dessert from that bakery you love." William's chest tightened. Emma was 38 now, a successful architect with her own family, but she still made time for weekly dinners with her parents. She had always been the bridge between William and Catherine when they faced difficult times, the living proof of their successful partnership. How could he tell her that everything she believed about her parents' marriage was a lie? "Dad." Emma appeared in the conservatory doorway, her dark hair escaping from its professional chignon after a long day at work. "Where's Mom?" "Her car is here. She's resting," William managed. "She has a headache." Emma's face immediately filled with concern. "Is she all right? Should I go check on her?" "No," William said too quickly. Then forced himself to speak more normally. "She just needs some quiet time. Why don't we have dinner together, just the two of us?" As they sat at the dining room table, Emma chattering about her latest architectural project and her children's school activities, William found himself studying his daughter's face. She had Catherine's eyes and smile, but her nose and the shape of her jaw came from him. There was no question that she was their child, born of their love and their partnership. But how much of that partnership had been real? "Dad, you're being very quiet tonight," Emma observed, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "Are you feeling all right?" William looked into his daughter's concerned face and felt the weight of the decision he would have to make. Should he burden her with the truth about her mother's secret life? Should he preserve her image of her parents' happy marriage at the cost of his own honesty? Or was there a middle ground that would protect Emma while allowing him to process his own devastating discovery? "Emma," he said carefully, "what would you do if you discovered that someone you loved had been keeping a significant secret from you for a very long time?" Emma tilted her head, considering the question. "That would depend on the secret, I suppose. And why they kept it. Sometimes people keep secrets to protect others, even when it hurts them to do so. And sometimes they keep secrets to protect themselves," William replied. "True." Emma studied her father's face, sensing undercurrents she couldn't quite identify. "Dad, are you and Mom having problems? You both seemed a bit off last week when I was here." William felt the urge to confess everything, to share the burden of discovery with someone who might help him make sense of it all. But, looking at Emma's open, trusting face, he realized he couldn't destroy her peace of mind simply to ease his own suffering. Every marriage has its challenges after 40 years, he said finally. We're just working through some things. After Emma left, promising to call the next day to check on Catherine, William found himself standing outside the East Wing again. The door was closed, but he could see light seeping from underneath. Catherine was still in her sanctuary, probably reading David's letters or looking at photographs of the life she had never fully abandoned. William raised his hand to knock, then lowered it again. What was there left to say? Catherine had made her choice long ago, and she had continued making it every day for 40 years. The woman he had loved with everything he had was, in many ways, a fiction, a partial truth that had been carefully constructed to hide the full reality of who she was. Instead of knocking, William went to his own study and pulled out a piece of stationery. If Catherine could maintain a correspondence that spanned decades, perhaps it was time for him to start one of his own. Dear David Morrison, he began, then stopped. What did one say to the man who had been unknowingly sharing your wife for 40 years? How did one begin a conversation with someone who represented everything that was wrong with your life? William crumpled the paper and threw it away. Some conversations couldn't be started with letters. The next morning, Catherine appeared at breakfast looking haggard and pale, but determined. She had clearly spent the night preparing for this conversation, and William could see the resolve in her eyes even through her exhaustion. I need to tell you something, she said without preamble as she sat down across from him. I think you've told me enough, William replied, not looking up from his newspaper. I've written to David, Catherine continued, ignoring his coldness. I've told him that our correspondence has to end, that I can't continue dividing my life between the two of you. William lowered his newspaper and studied his wife's face. And what did you tell him about why you were making this decision? I told him that you found out about us, and that I realized I couldn't keep hurting the man I married by maintaining a relationship with the man I loved before him. The man you still love, William corrected. Yes, Catherine admitted quietly. The man I still love. But, William, I chose you. 40 years ago, I chose you, and I'm choosing you again now. William set down his newspaper carefully, his movements deliberate and controlled. You're choosing me because you got caught, Catherine. You're not choosing me because you've realized that what we have is worth more than what you had with him. There's a difference. Catherine's face crumpled slightly, but she pressed on. Does it matter why I'm choosing you, as long as I am? Yes, William said firmly. It matters more than anything else in the world. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 40 years of marriage hanging between them like a bridge that had lost too many supports to remain standing. What do you want me to do? Catherine asked finally. Tell me what you need from me to make this right. William looked at his wife, really looked at her, taking in the silver hair that still caught the morning light beautifully, the eyes that had watched their grandchildren take their first steps, the hands that had held his through countless joys and sorrows. She was still beautiful, still the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. But she was also a stranger now, someone whose inner life had remained largely hidden from him despite 4 decades of shared intimacy. I don't know if you can make this right, he said honestly. I don't know if anyone can make this right. Catherine reached across the table toward his hand, then stopped when she saw him pull back slightly. William, please. We can get through this. Other couples have survived worse. Have they? William asked. Have other couples survived the discovery that their entire marriage was built on a foundation of divided loyalty? That every day for 40 years, their partner was choosing between them and someone else? I always chose you, Catherine said desperately. Every day, I chose to stay with you, to build our life together, to be your wife. No, William said quietly. Every day, you chose not to leave me. There's a difference between choosing me and simply not choosing him. The truth of his words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and inescapable. Catherine had spent 40 years taking the path of least resistance, maintaining both relationships rather than making the difficult choice to fully commit to one or the other. She had preserved her own comfort at the cost of William's right to a wife whose heart was completely his. I love you, Catherine said, her voice breaking. I know you don't believe me right now, but I do love you. I've loved you every day we've been married. I believe you, William replied, and Catherine felt a surge of hope until he continued. But you've also loved him every day we've been married. And I can't live with being half of someone's heart anymore. The finality in his voice made Catherine's blood run cold. What are you saying? William stood up from the table, suddenly, looking every one of his 73 years. I'm saying that for the first time in 40 years, I need to make a choice too. And I need to make it alone, without worrying about protecting your feelings or preserving the illusion of our happy marriage. He walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to face her. Catherine, I want you to understand something. This isn't about David Morrison. This isn't about some misguided jealousy over a man I've never met. This is about the fact that you've had 40 years to trust me with the truth about who you are, and you chose deception instead. That's what I can't forgive. Not the love you felt for someone else, but the lies you told to keep me from making informed decisions about my own life. After he left, Catherine sat alone at the breakfast table, staring at the cold coffee and untouched toast. For 40 years, she had managed to maintain both relationships, to love both men without fully losing either. But now, for the first time, she was facing the possibility that her careful balancing act had finally collapsed, and that she might lose everything she had tried so desperately to preserve. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the home she had shared with William for 20 years. Every corner held memories of their life together, evidence of the genuine love and partnership they had built despite her secret correspondence with David. But now those memories felt fragile, like soap bubbles that might pop at any moment, leaving nothing behind but the faint trace of what had once been beautiful. Catherine realized, with a clarity that was both liberating and terrifying, that she was finally going to have to make the choice she had been avoiding for 40 years. The question was whether she still had the power to choose at all, or whether the choice had already been made for her by the consequences of her own deception. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by the usual postman who had been serving their route for nearly a decade. Mrs. Davies brought it to William with his morning tea, her face grave as she recognized the handwriting on the envelope. It was addressed to Catherine, written in the now familiar script that William had seen tied with ribbons in the secret room, but this time Catherine was nowhere to be found. She had left 3 days earlier, claiming she needed time to think and space to process what had happened between them. William hadn't asked where she was going. Their conversations had become stilted and careful, each word measured for its potential to cause additional pain. But Mrs. Davies had quietly informed him that Catherine was staying at their cottage in the Lake District, the small retreat they had purchased for weekend getaways but rarely used in recent years. William held the letter in his hands, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. For 40 years, these letters had arrived regularly, and Catherine had always been there to receive them, to carry them to her secret room, and add them to her collection of hidden love. Now, for the first time, David Morrison's words had arrived to find Catherine absent, and William left to decide their fate. The ethical choice was clear. He should forward the letter unopened, respecting Catherine's privacy even in the midst of their marital crisis. But ethics and emotional devastation rarely worked in harmony, and William found himself torn between the man he had always been and the man this discovery was forcing him to become. He set the letter on his desk and tried to go about his normal routine, but its presence seemed to fill the study like a live wire, crackling with unspoken words and hidden emotions. By afternoon, William could no longer ignore the compulsion that had been growing inside him since the moment he first saw David Morrison's face smiling back at him from Catherine's photographs. William drove to the village and found the small internet cafe that catered to tourists and locals who needed computer access. His own relationship with technology had always been minimal. Catherine had handled their emails and online correspondence, but desperation had a way of forcing new competencies. After some trial and error, he managed to navigate to a people-finding website and entered David Morrison's name along with the information he remembered Catherine mentioning about Scotland and journalism. The search results were more comprehensive than he had expected. David Morrison, age 74, former foreign correspondent for the Times, currently residing in a cottage near Loch Katrine. Author of 3 books on European history. Winner of several journalism awards for his coverage of international conflicts. And there, in a small photograph accompanying a recent article about his latest book, was the face that had been haunting William's dreams for weeks. David Morrison was a handsome man, even in his 70s, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of an interesting life lived fully. His eyes held intelligence and warmth, and William could see why a young woman working at a museum would have fallen in love with him. More disturbing was how much he could see of himself in David's face, not in specific features, but in the general bearing of a thoughtful, educated man who valued words and ideas. Catherine hadn't just loved two men. She had loved the same type of man twice, suggesting that her feelings for both of them might have grown from similar roots. William wondered if she had chosen him not as a replacement for David, but as a continuation of the same attraction, a way of loving David through someone who would actually stay. The thought was both comforting and devastating. William returned home as the sun was setting, David Morrison's letter still sitting unopened on his desk, like an unexploded bomb. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he rarely did except on special occasions, and sat down to stare at the envelope that contained words meant for his wife from her lifelong lover. Mrs. Davies knocked softly on the door frame. "Sir, will you be wanting dinner soon?" "Mrs. Davies," William said without looking up. "How long have you known that I suspected something was wrong?" The elderly housekeeper stepped into the room, her face showing relief at finally being able to speak honestly. "Several months, sir. You started watching Mrs. Harrington differently, asking questions about her whereabouts. I could see it was tearing you apart. Why didn't you warn her?" "I wanted to," Mrs. Davies admitted. "But I also thought that perhaps it was time for the truth to come out. 40 years is a long time to carry such a burden, sir. For both of you." William nodded slowly, appreciating her honesty. "What do you think I should do about this?" He gestured toward the letter. Mrs. Davies was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "I think, sir, that knowledge is always better than ignorance, even when it hurts. You've already discovered the worst of it. Whatever that letter contains can't be more devastating than what you've already learned." After she left, William sat alone with the letter until well past midnight. Finally, with the careful movements of a man performing surgery on his own heart, he opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Catherine, I received your letter yesterday, and I must confess that I had to read it 3 times before I could accept what you were telling me. 43 years we have been in each other's lives, through marriages and children and careers and losses, and now you're asking me to say goodbye as if our connection could simply be severed by an act of will. I understand that William has discovered our correspondence, and I imagine his pain must be tremendous. I have always felt a strange sort of guilt about loving you while you were married to him, even though we never acted on that love physically. I know he is a good man. You have told me so many times over the years, and I know he loves you deeply. But, Catherine, I must ask you this. Can you truly say that ending our connection is what you want, or is it simply what you think you should do? For 40 years, you have lived between 2 lives, and I have accepted that arrangement because I preferred having part of your heart to having none of it at all. But I am 74 years old now, and the prospect of spending whatever years I have left without the woman I have loved since I was 28 is almost unbearable to contemplate. I know I have no right to ask this of you, especially now, but I must tell you the truth about what your letter has prompted me to realize. I love you, Catherine. I have always loved you, and I will continue to love you until I draw my last breath. If you are truly choosing to end our correspondence because you believe it is the right thing to do, then I will respect your decision. But if you are ending it out of guilt or fear or a sense of obligation to a marriage that was built on the foundation of your divided heart, then I am asking you to reconsider. Come to Scotland, Catherine. Come and see me one last time, and let us say goodbye properly if that is truly what you want. But let us also have the conversation we should have had 43 years ago, when we were young and thought we had all the time in the world to figure out how to love each other without destroying the other good things in our lives. I know this letter is selfish. I know it asks too much. But we are not young anymore, and I find that I care less about propriety and more about truth than I used to. If you can read this and tell me honestly that you will be happier spending the rest of your life wondering what might have been rather than facing what is, then I will never contact you again. But if there is any part of you that wonders whether we missed our chance at something that could have sustained us both, then please come. Let us spend 1 week together, talking and walking and remembering what it feels like to be ourselves rather than the careful, edited versions of ourselves that we have shared through letters all these years. I am not asking you to leave William. I would never ask that of you after 40 years of marriage. I am simply asking you to give us the chance to say goodbye with honesty rather than regret. I will be here waiting for as long as it takes you to decide. With all my love, David. William read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back in its envelope. He felt strangely calm, as if some final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. David Morrison's words confirmed everything William had suspected about the depth and persistence of the connection between him and Catherine. More importantly, They revealed that Catherine's decision to end the correspondence might not be as final as she had claimed. William walked to his study window and looked out at the garden where he and Catherine had spent countless hours together, planning and planting and dreaming about the future. Tomorrow, he would drive to the Lake District and deliver David's letter to his wife. And then he would ask Catherine the question that David had asked. Was she ending their correspondence because it was what she truly wanted, or because it was what she thought she should do? The answer would determine not just the future of their marriage, but the future of all three of their lives. William spent the night in his study, not sleeping but not quite awake either, existing in that strange liminal space between the end of one life and the beginning of another. As dawn broke over Rosewood Manor, he realized that he was no longer angry at Catherine or even at David Morrison. Instead, he was tired, bone-deep tired of living with half-truths and careful omissions, and the constant sense that the most important parts of his life were happening just outside his understanding. For 40 years, he had been a good husband to a woman who was, in many ways, an excellent wife. But excellent wives, like good husbands, should not require such elaborate constructions to maintain their marriages. Love should be simple enough to survive honesty, and if theirs was not, then perhaps it was time to stop pretending it was love at all. William packed a small overnight bag and left a note for Mrs. Davies explaining that he would be away for a few days. Then he got in his car and began the 3-hour drive to the Lake District, David Morrison's letter in his jacket pocket, to finally have the conversation that should have happened 40 years earlier. The morning was clear and bright, and as William drove through the English countryside, he found himself thinking not about the past but about the future. For the first time in months, he felt like he was moving toward something rather than away from it. Whether that something was reconciliation or separation, forgiveness or divorce, he didn't know. But it would be built on truth, and that alone felt like a gift he was giving to all three of them. The cottage in the Lake District sat like a watercolor painting against the backdrop of rolling hills and morning mist. William had always loved this place. They had bought it 15 years earlier as a retreat from the pressures of their London life, a sanctuary where they could reconnect with each other and with the natural world. Now, as he pulled into the gravel driveway, it felt like approaching a battleground where the final conflict of their marriage would be decided. Catherine's car was parked under the old oak tree where she had always left it, and smoke was rising from the chimney, suggesting she was awake and preparing for another day of solitude. William sat in his car for several minutes, David's letter heavy in his jacket pocket, trying to prepare himself for a conversation that would change everything. When he finally knocked on the cottage door, Catherine opened it immediately, as if she had been watching for his arrival. Her face showed surprise, relief, and apprehension in rapid succession. "William," she breathed, "I wasn't expecting you." "We need to talk," he said simply, and Catherine stepped aside to let him in. The cottage's main room was just as he remembered it. Comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace, windows that looked out onto the lake, shelves lined with the books they had brought here over the years for quiet reading. But today the familiar space felt charged with tension, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Catherine had clearly been struggling with her own demons during her time here. She looked thinner than when she had left, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But there was also something different in her posture, a kind of resolve that William hadn't seen in years. "You came to bring me David's letter," Catherine said. It wasn't a question. William pulled the envelope from his pocket and held it out to her. "It arrived yesterday. I almost forwarded it unopened." "But you didn't." "No." William watched as Catherine took the letter, her fingers trembling slightly as she recognized the handwriting. "I read it, Catherine. I know what he's asking you to do." Catherine sank into one of the armchairs by the fireplace, clutching the unopened letter. "Then, you know that he's asking me to come to Scotland to see him. He's asking you to come say goodbye properly," William corrected. "There's a difference." Catherine looked up at him sharply. "Is there?" "William, I've been thinking about nothing but our conversation for 3 days. About what you said about making choices and living with divided loyalty. And I've realized something." William settled into the chair across from her, preparing himself for whatever revelation was coming. "I've been a coward," Catherine continued, her voice gaining strength. "For 43 years, I've been a coward. I fell in love with David when I was young, but I was too afraid of his lifestyle to commit to him fully. Then, I fell in love with you, but I was too afraid to let go of David completely. I've spent my entire adult life trying to have everything while committing to nothing. William was quiet, recognizing the truth in her words, but waiting to see where her self-reflection was leading. Reading your face that night in the secret room, Catherine went on, seeing how much I had hurt you by trying to love you both. William, it was like looking in a mirror and, finally, seeing myself clearly for the first time. I had convinced myself that I was protecting both of you by keeping my feelings divided. But I was really protecting myself from having to choose. And now? William asked softly. Catherine looked down at David's letter, still unopened. Now I need to make the choice I should have made 43 years ago. Not because I was caught, and not because I was forced to, but because it's time to stop being afraid of living with the consequences of my decisions. William felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. What choice are you making? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fireplace where the morning fire was beginning to die down. I want to go to Scotland, she said finally. I want to see David one last time, and have the conversation we never had about why I couldn't choose him when we were young. William felt the words like a physical blow, but, strangely, there was also relief in them. At least she was being honest. And then? He asked. And then, I want to come home to you and have the conversation we never had about whether we can build a real marriage on the foundation of complete honesty, even when that honesty includes the fact that I will always have loved someone else. William studied his wife's face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-deception, but finding only a raw vulnerability he had rarely seen in their 40 years together. You're asking me to let you go to another man so that you can decide whether you want to stay married to me. Yes, Catherine said simply. That's exactly what I'm asking. William stood up and walked to the window overlooking the lake, where ducks were gliding across the still water in the morning light. Behind him, he could hear Catherine opening David's letter, the soft rustle of paper as she unfolded his words. Catherine, William said without turning around, if you go to Scotland, there's a very real chance that you won't come back. I know. And if you don't go, there's a very real chance that you'll spend the rest of our marriage wondering what would have happened if you had. I know that too. William turned to face her. Catherine had tears streaming down her face as she read David's letter, but her expression was calm, almost serene. What does he say? William asked. He says he loves me, Catherine replied, looking up at William with eyes that held 43 years of accumulated longing. He says he's tired of loving me from a distance, and he wants to know if there's any possibility that we could be together properly before we're too old to enjoy it. And what do you want to tell him? Catherine folded the letter carefully and set it on the table beside her chair. I want to tell him yes, I'll come to Scotland. Not because I've decided to leave you, but because I need to understand what I'm choosing between. And, William, I need you to understand something. If I'm going to stay married to you, it has to be because I choose you fully, not because I'm too afraid or too guilty to choose anyone else. William felt the logic of her argument even as it tore at his heart. For 40 years, Catherine had stayed with him while maintaining an emotional connection to David Morrison. If their marriage was going to continue, it needed to be based on a genuine choice rather than the absence of alternatives. If I say yes to this, William said carefully, if I agree to let you go to Scotland to spend time with the man you've loved for 43 years, I need something from you in return. What? I need you to promise me that whatever decision you make, you'll make it cleanly. No more divided loyalties, no more secret correspondences, no more trying to love two men simultaneously. Choose David or choose me, but choose completely. Catherine nodded slowly. I promise. They spent the rest of the morning talking through the practical aspects of her trip to Scotland. When she would go, how long she would stay, how they would communicate during her absence. The conversation was strange in its normalcy, as if they were planning a vacation rather than a test that would determine the future of their marriage. In the afternoon, Catherine called David from the cottage phone while William sat outside on the porch, close enough to hear her voice, but not her words. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and when Catherine emerged from the cottage, her face was flushed with an excitement William had not seen in years. I'm leaving tomorrow, she told him. David is going to meet me at the train station in Glasgow, and we're going to spend a week at his cottage. William nodded, though his stomach felt like it was full of broken glass. And after the week? After the week, I'll call you and let you know what I've decided. That evening, they prepared dinner together in the cottage's small kitchen, moving around each other with the practiced ease of 4 decades of shared meals. They talked about safe subjects, Emma's children, the garden at Rosewood Manor, plans for renovating the cottage's bathroom. Neither mentioned the fact that this might be their last dinner together, that by this time next week, their marriage might effectively be over. As they were cleaning up, Catherine suddenly stopped what she was doing and turned to face William. "I need you to know something," she said. "Whatever happens in Scotland, whatever I decide, you have been a wonderful husband to me. You've been patient and kind and loving, and you didn't deserve to be kept in the dark about David all these years." William set down the dish towel he had been using and looked at his wife, really looked at her, taking in every detail of her face as if he were trying to memorize it. "Catherine," he said softly, "you need to know something too. If you choose David, if you decide that what you have with him is worth more than what we've built together, I will be devastated. But I will also understand. I would rather lose you to an honest choice than keep you through deception." They went to bed in the cottage's single bedroom, lying beside each other in the darkness without touching. William listened to Catherine's breathing, trying to determine if she was sleeping or simply lying awake as he was. Around midnight, she spoke into the darkness. "William." "Yes. I'm scared. So am I. What if I make the wrong choice?" William was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer a question that had no safe response. "I don't think there is a wrong choice," he said finally. "I think there are just different choices, each with their own consequences. The wrong choice would be not to choose at all, to keep living in the liminal space you've occupied for 43 years. In the morning, William drove Catherine to the train station. They said goodbye at the platform with a brief kiss and a long hug that felt like both a beginning and an ending. "I love you," Catherine whispered against his ear. "Whatever happens, please remember that I have loved you every day for 40 years. "I love you too," William replied, though the words felt strange in his mouth, as if he were speaking in a language he was only just learning. As the train pulled away from the station, carrying Catherine toward a reunion with the man she had loved before she ever met William, he stood on the platform until the last car disappeared around a bend in the tracks. Then, he walked back to his car and began the drive home to Rosewood Manor, where he would wait to learn whether his marriage would survive its first real test of honesty. For the first time in 40 years, William felt like he was living in the truth rather than alongside it. The sensation was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, like stepping off a cliff and discovering he could fly. 7 days later, the phone rang at Rosewood Manor. William answered it on the second ring, his heart pounding as he heard Catherine's voice on the other end of the line. "William," she said, and in that single word, he heard everything he needed to know about the choice she had made. But that, as they say, is another story entirely. End of story.